Good morning, fifth graders. Today we're going to be looking at plants, specifically a couple categorizations of plants, how they move nutrients throughout themselves, different ways they produce seeds, and we're also going to be looking at our seeds or spores, but we're also going to be looking at those plants that produce seeds and categorizing them, putting them in groups. Then finally, we're going to look at the parts of a flower, how that flower creates pollen and reproduces, and then quickly go through the parts of a leaf. We will answer these questions. What are the basic needs of a plant? And also, what are the parts of a plant? So we'll be able to answer these two questions here. All right, basic needs of a plant. This is pretty simple. I think we knew this already. Every plant needs gases, so that's usually going to be carbon dioxide. It needs sunlight, water, nutrients, and space. Of course, the nutrients and water they get from the ground if it has roots. Some plants that we're going to see in a moment absorb those things, but all those plants need sunlight to create photosynthesis. The photosynthesis creates the sugar in the plant, and of course that sugar flows through the phloem throughout the whole rest of the plant. The plants also need space. If the roots can't get enough space or nutrients, it's going to be the plant will be smaller than normal. Other plants will choke it off. So these are the basic needs of all plants. All right, now we're going to talk about vascular and non-vascular plants. This is another grouping that we can make with plants. Vascular plants are plants that can take nutrients from the ground and transfer them through itself through the xylem. So your grasses, your shrubs, your trees, these are vascular plants. They get water and nutrients from the ground, and through the xylem that travels up and down up to the rest of the part of the plant. So please take notes on this. This is important. Vascular plants are plants that have tissues that allow them to move water, nutrients, and sugars across long distances. So if you think of a big tree, it goes from the roots all the way up to the top of the tree, even if it's meters tall. And it flows through the xylem, so water and nutrients from the plants, from the roots to other parts of the plant. We know that. That's just kind of a review. And then, of course, the sugar made in photosynthesis travels through the phloem. This is something that vascular plants are able to do. Now, a difference here between a non-vascular plant is that these are examples of non-vascular plants here. They are your mosses. They are very small. They don't grow very tall. They do not have a xylem and a phloem. Basically, it absorbs the nutrients and waters directly. So these plants need to be in moist, wet spots. You're not going to see these non-vascular plants growing in the hot sunlight. They are simple plants. They are usually very small, and they grow in damp places, like I said. But the important thing here between knowing the difference between non-vascular plants and vascular plants is that non-vascular plants absorb nutrients and water. This is important. Whereas vascular plants get it from the ground and it travels through the xylem to the other parts of the plant. All right, how plants reproduce. So a plant is either going to produce a spore or it's going to produce seeds. And knowing the difference between both is useful to know. So we'll start off with a spore. A spore comes from things like mushrooms and ferns. Fungi is where spores come from. And spores, we need to highlight this part, if I could highlight it, is a single reproductive cell that can grow into a whole new plant. So usually when a plant that produces spores releases the spores, it's like a cloud. And wherever it hits, it can start to grow. So even if you breathe that in, that can be dangerous. It depends on the plant, I guess. But a spore is a single cell that can immediately start to grow. And spores can come from vascular and non-vascular plants. So ferns produce spores, and so do mosses. Seeds are different. Seeds are are a reproductive structure that stays protected before germination. So a seed comes from a plant that's going to either produce cones or flowers, and a seed is protected by a covering. So this is most of the plants that we think of or know of. Seeds come in all different shapes and sizes. You can see that here. They look different. Some are big, some are small. These seeds wait until the right condition to germinate or sprout, which is the same way of saying it. Scientists have been able to grow seeds that have been found in tombs and other sites hundreds and thousands of years after they have been left there. All the seed needs is the right conditions, and usually that's a moist, warm area, and they'll start to germinate. All right. Now seeds, we get seeds from two different kinds of plants. The first kind is called a gymnosperm. A gymnosperm is going to be your pine tree. You see a pine cone here? Here we have pine cones, two different kinds here. These are examples where you get these just different examples of gymnosperms. So in this pine cone is not a seed. The seeds are in it. And you see this is open, this is closed. When this opens up, the seeds are able to fall out. So it's a little bit different. There's no flower here. It's just a cone of some sort. There's some examples here. They look like little balls. But they do not produce flowers. That's key. They do not produce the seeds and flowers. It's going to be the big difference between gymnosperms and the next kind, which are called angiosperms. Angiosperms are plants that produce seeds in flowers. So if anything that flowers is an angiosperm, and that's 85% of all plants. Whether it's your apple tree, orange tree, daffodils, irises, they all produce flowers, and those flowers make the seeds. That's a form of reproduction there. So big difference between angiosperms and gymnosperms that you need to know. Angiosperms create flowers, gymnosperms do not. We're also going to look at the parts of a flower here. You're going to label this. I'm going to use some words that are a little bit different than are on here. That will appear in another video that we have coming up. But the way the flowers reproduce. This is the female part of the plant. It's called a stigma or a pistil. This is a stamen. So there's 4 stamens here in this picture. Usually a flower has many stamens. The stamens produce pollen. The pollen gets moved to the stamen, the stigma here, or the pistil, and it starts the reproductive process. And down here in the what's called the ovary is where the fruit starts to grow, and the seed grows within the fruit. So then we have petals and the steeple and all that. The key things here is the stamen, and the whole thing is called the pistil. The end part's called the stigma. Pollen moves from here to germinate the flower. So you can take notes here. Make sure you write these things down. This top part's called the anther. The part that holds it is called the filament. Of course, this is the stigma. So this is the male part. This is the female part. Not all plants have both the female and male parts. Some flowers will. Some will just have the male parts, and some will just have the female part. And how does the pollen get from one to the other? Well, it's through pollinators like bees and wasps and ants and ladybugs and birds, that sort of thing. The pollen sticks to it and gets moved here. Very quickly, we're also going to look at the parts of a leaf. So a lot of this is review, but we know a leaf has a xylem, and the xylem carries water and nutrients throughout the whole plant. From the roots, the phloem is where the sugar made in photosynthesis travels through. They travel in veins. There's the stoma, which are openings in the leaf that allow in different gases or releases gases. So you remember a plant breathes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. There's cells around it that open and close it. Then they have a cuticle, which is a waxy kind of skin on a leaf that prevents water from evaporating. Plants don't want to lose water. And then the epidermis is a fancy name for a skin. So these here, make sure you write these down, and part of your homework assignment will be labeling the parts of a leaf here. Alright, the video you're going to watch, the second video, is specifically more about how plants are pollinated.